All right. Well, we're ready to go. Let me get to our opening speaker, Chris Harvey, who is someone that I've been privileged to know for years and has worked with us at MDDC and in this program for years. It's hard to imagine doing this program without her. So we're not even trying to do it without her. We're doing it with her, as we seem to always do. Chris has an extraordinary background in journalism, including working as a digital editor for the Washington Post, magazine editor, political reporter, journalism teacher at the University of Maryland, where she now works still, overseeing a weekend graduate multimedia certificate program and teaching courses in reporting and editing. So Chris, it's great to have you with us, and take it away.
Thank you, guys. And it's really nice to see everybody, all these wonderful new interns here. Sadly, I don't think I've met any of you over at Maryland. We've been out all year, and I think the couple of years before that, I was teaching some of the grad classes. So it's nice to see some of you from Maryland, but also from all the other great schools that have been recruited for this. What I've been asked to do today is just to talk a bit about when you get thrown into a beat, what do you do, right? You're going to start somewhere new. You've never worked before. Editors are going to have expectations of you. So I want you to think about things that might help you to hit the ground running. And then if there's time left after that conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit too about some search techniques that might help you to find information on the fly when you're trying to report your stories. Can you guys tell me before I get started, how many of you are journalism majors and how many are majors of other types of cool things beyond journalism? How many of you are journalism majors? Can you just do a little show of thumbs or hands maybe so I can see? I see one, and I'm not on the big grid here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So about half of you. And the rest of you, can you just real quickly say out loud one at a time what your majors are? And anybody can start.
I'll go.
Sorry.
I go to UD, so I'm an English major. I actually minor in journalism just because we don't have a journalism major here, but I didn't know if you want me to put my thumb up.
Okay, that's close and good.
I also go to UD, and there's no journalism major, like Crystal said. So I'm a communications major with a journalism minor.
Great, that's very close. And who else?
I'm a communications and media studies and political science double major with a minor in journalism editing and publishing.
Terrific, that sounds great. And then there's one more, I think, that has a different major.
My major is mass communications, but I had a concentration in convergence journalism.
Okay, well, it sounds like all of you then actually have some facility with what we're going to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. I just have a few little slides. Can you see something that says MDDC Internship Workshop? Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about things to think about before you hit the ground at all these lovely places you're going to be going to be reporters. I know that when I was a young reporter, some of the editors that I worked for kind of warned me up front, try to find things out before you get there, or else you're going to be assigned a lot of stories that you may or may not be interested in. So the more upfront work you can do and the more ideas that you come in with into your new job that you're going to be doing, probably the happier you'll be, because you'll get a shot maybe sometimes doing stories that you've thought up versus your editors. So how do you find stories? It's going to sound really basic, but one of the first things you need to do wherever you're heading is to look through the stories they've been writing and making projects of over the last few weeks. So please go to the websites of the publications you're going to be writing for if you haven't done that already, and look and see the big stories that are appearing on the homepage or on the section fronts. What are they writing about, right? What do they care about? Depending on where you're located, you know, some publications might be more rural or in agricultural areas, and the focus will be very different than what you might see on the front page of the Baltimore Sun. So try to get a sense by looking through the publication, what they're interested in, what they've been focusing on recently. And if you read through some of the stories, what's missing from the stories that you think, the angles that need to be pursued? A lot of times, as you know, reporters are writing story, they have a quick deadline, they write in a couple of hours, they push something out, and they do the best they can, but the stories aren't as thorough as they might have been. And so just start reading through and saying, you know, I had a lot of questions from this. I'm wondering about this and this. Those might be a great starting point for follow-up stories or for broader stories. Sometimes the story will focus just on what happened that day, but some people are talking in the story that have interesting titles or that say interesting things. And if you kind of keep that as a thread or jot that down in a little notebook, it might be somebody that you come back to do a feature on or a profile on, right? You start to meet characters that could make interesting stories all by themselves. So your stories don't have to be just about what's happening today or what's happening tomorrow. They might provide fodder for you to think of bigger stories or more fun stories that would stem from that. So reading not only your publication, but figure out who the direct competitors are to your publication too. So for instance, at least one of you said you were going to the Baltimore Sun. Well, depending on the county that you're working from or covering, you know, there might be competitors in Carroll County or in Annapolis because their reach is quite far. And the same goes for some of the bigger Delaware publications, the News Journal. You know, what are the surrounding communities and do they have smaller news publications that compete for those areas? So look and see what they're writing about that your publication might have missed, and you'll get some ideas for stories. And just start jotting them down because you're smart, you're curious, and you're going to think of things that, you know, just by funneling in and really focusing on some of this stuff, you might think of some interesting angles for stories. Talking to your editors before you hit the ground too might be helpful, and just say, are there some specific areas that you know, are there specific things I'm going to focus on and that you want me to read up on? They'll be impressed that you asked that before you get there, right? And just keep continuing that conversation. Sometimes big publications have PR or marketing folks even that could give you inside information on communities. They gather a lot of data on readership, right? And who's looking at their publication, reading it. And so they might be able to give you a handle on that. The interesting thing is sometimes the readership for the online product, the digital product, might be different than if it's a TV station or a print publication than the folks that read the print publication. And even keeping that in mind is helpful. So yeah, then think about things that are topical, because even if you're going to a tiny publication, I went to Maryland, I graduated as a journalism major, and I grabbed the first job that came my way before I even graduated. I was so nervous about being unemployed. The first thing that offered me something I grabbed. I'm not sure I advocate that tactic, but it did land me in a series of interesting jobs. And the first place I went was way down in Southern Maryland, St. Mary's County, to a tiny place. And you might think, well, there's you know, what would they be covering that's topical? Sometimes you can take a national story. What have been some of the big national stories of the last year that you've been watching or reading about, you know, that's on your radar? What are some of the big stories that you've been following? Anybody? You know, I'm thinking of two that have been in every publication all over the country. The police brutality and Black Lives Matter movement that sprung from those issues is one, right? Everybody's been writing about that because it's a widespread problem in the US. And everybody's been writing about the impact of COVID and the pandemic, right? It's a global problem, and it's certainly a problem all over the country here. So with that in mind, you know, you've read some of the stories probably out of the Washington Post or the Baltimore Sun or some of the Delaware publications. They might give you the big picture, the national picture. But what about in the community you're about to head to? You know, think about things that if you live there, how it might have touched you and what you might want to write about. You know, so are there movements in the local, in Anne Arundel County? One of you said you're going to the Capitol. Are the county council members doing anything about the police department in Anne Arundel County, you know, to try to get at some of the issues that we've had with police officers? Did the General Assembly, a lot of you are working in Delaware, I think all of you are working somewhere in Delaware or in Maryland. What about the two legislatures in those states? Did they pass anything this year that would have an impact on at the local level? You know, did they funnel money to make changes in the police department? Did they specifically send something to your county? Because sometimes local legislators will, you know, push for money to come just to their community for specific things. So starting to drill down and think about, it's a big national problem, but how's it hitting here? What's happening here might lead you to some stories. Most recently, most jurisdictions sent kids back to school, right? They've been, you know, as college students, you've probably been online. I know I've been teaching online for a year, but the K-12 schools also have been in some kind of either fully online or hybrid models. But I know that since we all start getting shots this spring, a lot of schools have been opening up again, either in a modified schedule or full on. What's the impact of that, right? We're getting near the end of the semester. Is there going to be a lot of cleanup and additional instruction that's going to be needed over the summer to prep kids for the fall? So just thinking about like, well, here's a big story. What's happening here in my community might lead you to some good questions that could lead to a story. And by reading up on those topics in your local paper, you'll start to see lists of people that you might talk to. It sounds dorky, but a lot of times what I'll do if I'm new to a beat and I don't know the players in that beat, who the big people are that are important, start reading the stories about that beat and start a spreadsheet, either a Google sheet or an Excel sheet where you list some of the people you're seeing in these stories, and you put their name, you put their title, and then you go to the county government site or the local site, find their email address, find their phone number, do a search in Twitter. Do you all have Twitter accounts at this point? I know if you're at the J program at Maryland, we make you get a Twitter account in 201. If some of your other schools haven't done that yet, I strongly urge you to get a Twitter account that you're going to use as a journalist, because one nice thing, as you know, with Twitter is you can start following people. I call them the thought leaders. Who are the people on your beat that you're seeing in stories? What's their account on Twitter? Find them and hit follow, because you're going to start to see them announcing things that they're doing or reacting to big problems, saying things sometimes that are really idiotic that might lend you to a follow-up story. Can you think of a politician in the last year who used Twitter extensively and often said inflammatory things on it that led to stories? Anybody? Some of you are nodding your head. Who are you thinking of?
Donald Trump.
Yuppers. So all the political reporters followed him, of course, because he tweeted so many times a day and often said things he shouldn't have. And often those political reporters were doing quick stories based on what he tweeted out. So you want to follow your thought leaders on Twitter. A lot of them are a lot more careful about what they post on Twitter, but still it might lead to stories. So if you find yourself covering politics or schools or police or whatever the beat is, look for the thought leaders, look for the people who are elected or in high positions in government and start following them, because I can guarantee you'll start seeing story ideas from that. And you'll see people in the community interacting with those thought leaders, and you'll find more people that you might be able to put in your spreadsheet as potential sources. So in our reporting classes, we just say, let's start developing a beat list. And one of the things you do is you read up, you find names, but you start following people to see what they're talking about that might generate interesting stories. And then you take the next step. Obviously, you've written down their email address, you found their phone number by going to the government site, call them up. Because the best thing still, despite all these tools we have that are digital, the best way to get people to trust you to talk to you is to meet them and not just talk to them on the phone. And fortunately for you, probably have you all gotten your COVID shots? You don't have to answer me, but it's a good idea to get it as a reporter, because you may be sent out this summer. I know we were kind of all in a lockdown mode for a long time before the vaccine came out. But with everybody getting vaccinated, I think a lot of newsrooms are going to be able to send reporters out in the field again. And so that's, although it's possible and actually was done extensively in the last year to talk to people on the phone or to talk to people on Zoom, it really helps if you can safely get out and talk to people in person to do that. Because I found as a reporter that people tend to trust you if you have more personal connection with them. I'm not saying you don't want to be a friend, but you want to be friendly and have them able to trust you, and getting out to meet them as a starting point for that. So work that spreadsheet, start figuring out who the players are. And then even if you're still not, your vaccine might not be fully working yet, you might not have had the shot that long, you can still get out and drive around and walk around and start jotting down things you notice in the community that you're going to be covering. You know, are people out and about now? Because for the longest time, right, the streets were barren. Even in cities in Washington, you'd go out and drive around and it was like the dead zone, right? What's happening now? Are the streets coming alive again? I know a lot of businesses, even in my neighborhood here, I live right near campus in College Park. A lot of businesses went belly up last year. A lot of local businesses restaurants and hairdressers gone because they couldn't sustain themselves during the COVID lockdowns. But what about now? You know, walk around, see if you can get a sense of if there's a lot of boarded up, locked up places, or are people back and thriving? Because that might lead to feature stories about, you know, what's happening this summer in response to COVID. So use your eyes and ears and not just your fingertips on digital platforms to check out the community and see what you might want to follow up on. You know, what government sites might be useful? I put down a couple here in Maryland, but I'm sure that there are analogous sites to this in Delaware as well. I know a lot of times when you have to write about a community, it helps to get information from the US Census site because they keep demographics on cities, on counties, on states, and on the federal, the whole country. For you to see, you know, get a quick sense of who's living here, who's in this place. So for instance, this quick facts on the census site, let me see if I can get over to this. This, I had done a search, I'd gone to the homepage and searched just for literally 2 words, quick facts, but it's all smushed together here in the search. And you can post in here information for city, town, US, or by zip code to find places. And you can also say, I want to look up population estimates, you know, something about the people, their ages, their sexes. And so what I had done here is just do a search for the population demographics for Maryland and the US. And so even knowing, stepping in, you know, I'm going to Baltimore, it's the biggest city in the state. Here's Maryland, here's the US. Scrolling down and looking at your city or your state, comparing it to the state or the US can be instructive. You know, what's the population ages? What are most people who live in this community? What are their ages? What are their races? So if you're looking at Maryland, you'll see our white population in Maryland is lower than the US. We have more people of color in the state than there are in the US. And then you'd want to look, if you're covering Baltimore, and see what the demographics are for that city as well. How many people are there, right? How's the housing situation? How's the living arrangements, the households? How many people have available home computers? And you can see now in Maryland, the numbers are super high, and probably a lot of people were driven over the last year to upgrade themselves with technology as well. You know, how many people have high school diplomas or bachelor's degrees? And you'll see in Maryland, we actually are ahead of the United States as far as folks having 4-year degrees. So do this, you know, get acquainted with some of the census information. You know, what's the median household income? We're actually pretty well to do in Maryland. If you look at it, 84,000 is the median income here in the state versus 62, almost 63,000 for the US. If you were to search in Baltimore, you'd see a different number there too, and it gives you a better sense of, you know, what kind of people are living here. So do some searches and get some information before you land in a community, and just start saying, you know, are there a lot of people living in poverty, or is it a really wealthy area? The same, I don't know if you've ever heard of a book called the Maryland Manual online, and you can search in Delaware and see what kind of a state government book there is. But in Maryland, this is really helpful because you can search quickly and find information in here. You can see they list not only the COVID-19 site is now a full resource guide within this book, or you could just search on the state health sites in either state, and I'm positive you'd find the COVID information there too. But this site also gives you information on legislative branch, the court systems, the federal government. So at your fingertips, very easily, you can find information if you don't feel comfortable or competent in knowing a lot about the elected officials. What I did here was just break out some of the links. You know, if you're thinking, who the heck is the senator, the US senator? There are two in every state, obviously, representing you. Who are they? Sometimes you forget, and you can find it in the manual. There's also a great link here that you can find wherever you move in Maryland, and look for this, again, look for this information in Delaware. You can punch in a street address and find out who your elected officials are if you move in and you don't know. I'm just going to put a general, like a block of information here. Whoops. This is a part of a block near me, but can you see by putting in where I live, it's telling me, hopefully you know who your governor is, but the lieutenant governor, who gets a lot less ink, you might not be as familiar with, the attorney general, the comptroller who handles the money and the taxes, the US senators. My local congressman is Steny Hoyer here in the 5th district. Then it tells you the state senators, the folks who are elected at the state level, right? Your senator and then your delegates. So it's really useful if you don't want to feel too out of it and like, oh God, I don't even know who my officials are. You can find it quickly, often with some of these handy tools that are online. The election boards in states too have a wealth of information that's really helpful for any kind of, when you're covering elections. And you might say, well, we just had the presidential election last year, I'm not going to really need that. Well, you will in Maryland. You'll need to find out in Delaware, when's your next statewide election. 2022, we've got a gubernatorial race here in Maryland, and probably you're going to want to know who's running, right? And what the voter registration is, when's the primary, when's the general election, who are the candidates. And so I went earlier just to see what they had up on the state site in Maryland. They do have all the primary information. I didn't know the exact date already. It's up for next year, June 28th. And your publications will probably be starting to gear up for this, sadly. We just got out of one election cycle and we're about to get into another one. So do be aware that you can actually look up and see on these sites, you know, how did each county go in the state? How did they vote? Did they vote for the Republican or did they vote for the Democrat? How does it lean? Do any of you know off the top of your head in Maryland how the voter registration leans? Is it more Republicans or more Democrats statewide? Does anybody know? Have you covered much political stuff yet? In Maryland, the statewide voter registration leans about 2-to-1 Democratic. The funny thing is, when I first started out, which was a while ago, it was 3-to-1 Democratic when I became a reporter. So things change over time, but the state is still a blue state. But lots of the counties within the state aren't. So it's often fun to see, you know, leading up to an election cycle or afterwards, how did each of the counties go? You know, where might you expect in Maryland that there probably would be areas that leaned Democratic? What are some of the Democratic strongholds in the state? Anybody from, is anybody from Maryland?
Yeah, I was going to say the Baltimore area is definitely more blue.
The city for sure, Baltimore City.
Yeah.
County, Tom's going to know this better than me, but I think Baltimore County might have a pretty high Republican registration too. But PG, where I live, PG County, Prince George's is definitely very, very lopsidedly Democratic. Montgomery County leans Democratic too. Not surprisingly, a lot of the counties in Western Maryland and the Eastern Shore are more conservative, more Republicans. They're more rural areas. But that's good information to know too, walking into a coverage area, you know, who you're likely to start seeing and talking to, and how that county swings. So by looking at the Board of Elections sites, you can get some really good backgrounding information. And I had previously pulled up this link. I'm not going to spend time here, but just, you know, to get the breakdown county by county for what happened in Maryland in 2016. You remember in that race, up until the day of, a lot of pundits were predicting and a lot of the polls were showing that Hillary Clinton was going to beat Trump. And obviously that didn't happen. And so even though there was a lot of legwork done to see how places leaned and what the polls were showing, it didn't quite give us a good picture for a lot of reasons on what happened in that race. So there are a lot of quick sites you can go to. I'm going to stop this share for a minute. Other sites too are valuable. The Maryland state government has a legislative site that allows you to search to find specific bills. So you can search by topic or by bill number, if you know the number, to see what was passed in a session. If you're doing a follow-up on attempts to restrict gun use, for instance, you can search by topic. I'm sure that pretty much every state's going to have that online at this point, and so you can do searches. You don't have to run to the state capitol to find the information. And the same if you're covering a piece of a congressional debate on something, on gun control or money that's going to the counties or the states, COVID relief, right? You can look up on the government site, the US government site, to find those bills and to see what the votes were and to see who sponsored them. All important if you're a story on that topic. So do be aware there's some quick ways to find the information. But sometimes, right, sometimes you're going to be asked on a beat to, you know, okay, well, you're not going to go to a specific site. You're going to need to figure it out on the fly. And probably a lot of what you do is search on Google to find things, right? How do you, if you're told today by your editor, I want you to write about weather predictions for this summer, you know, and are we going to have trouble with drought or too much rain or flooding? What would you do? How would you start looking for that? What would your first steps be? Well, we do know there is a federal government site. Do you know what the site is? You probably look at it sometimes if you're trying to figure out if you need your umbrella today or tomorrow. What's the government site that you can look at to see weather reports by zip code for your area? Does anybody know that?
Weather.gov.
Okay, yeah, the National Weather Service, and I don't have the URL in my head, but if you look for the National Weather Service site, do you want to do that real quick on your own computer before I grab you back? Pull up a browser and take a look at the look for the National Weather Service. I'm going to do it too while you're searching, and I want to just ask you what you find. So on mine, it comes up NOAA.gov, NOAA.gov. Right? And there's a little button at the top left that says find your local weather, and you can search by zip code there, right? So I'm going to punch in my own zip code. You could do that for yourself. And you can get the full local forecast. It's a lot more involved than what I get on my phone with my app there, the National Weather Service. It gives you the full week and it gives you a lot of information. The nice thing about this site too is that they have an archive of information on past weather. So if you had to cover, let's say they were predicting a hurricane or a tornado might be coming through in the next 24 hours, you could go to the National Weather Service site and see if you could find background on previous hurricanes or tornadoes in your area. So do be aware, they have press officers too. So if you're trying to just get some information, I know when I was a reporter, I had a regular connection with some of the press people at the Weather Service office. They had a facility in Virginia and they spoke for the region. So sometimes you can use them as sources if you get stuck. Often new reporters get stuck doing weather stories, right? So do be aware that there's some good information online for that. But let me just pull up, because even just searching in Google, if you have some advanced search tools, you can find things pretty quickly. So let me hang on here. I'm going to just set up my oops.
While Chris is setting up the scene for her next session piece, I just want to draw your attention to the chat. MDDC has done a fair number of recorded sessions on like how-tos. So we did a whole series on understanding campaign finance reporting, where we had the basically the political reporter at the Post, the News Journal, and the Baltimore Sun really go in depth on how to use those campaign finance websites, what they're looking for, how you can pull information out. They're super useful, even if you're not covering an election per se, because people have to disclose lots of things about how they make their money, and where they're spending it. So just check the chat for some links to some of those pieces.
That's great. Thank you. That's a really good tip. And obviously the federal site is wonderful too. You can search it by specific congressman or senator to see who gives the money and how much. And it can really be instructive. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, because I do just want to talk about search a little bit, because it can be your friend too when you're trying to do stories. Okay. All right, so we just want to talk about maybe improving your search skills for journalism. And I don't know if any of you have seen this at Merrill. I've shown this around, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up this little screen here just to start thinking about, what are we seeing and what do we think about it? So there's this site called Feline Reactions to Bearded Men. And it was research that was done to see how cats would react to photos of men with beards. And you'll see on this site, they talked about some previous investigations that had been done that led to this investigation. They talked about some materials that were used, the photos that were used, the kinds of pictures of the bearded men, the methodology, things that you would expect from a scientific experiment. And then they started to take data on the results, what happened with the specific cats when they saw these specific photos. Any thoughts so far? I'm just kind of scrolling through what they had here. Any thoughts jumping out at you about this particular study as I scroll through? Here are some of the interpretations. Cats don't like men with long beards, especially long dark beards. They're indifferent to shorter beards. They can be confused by men with other types of beards. There's some acknowledgments here and some notes. Any thoughts as I scroll down here? The notes?
Hey, Chris, I can't see your scroll. We're still on the let's start at the beginning piece of your slide.
So it doesn't show up on the, when I click. That's going to be a problem then. And I'm going to just pull out of that then.
Okay.
The problem with the page, so on Zoom, if you don't have it all in one place, if it's not all on your browser, if it was on your desktop, it doesn't show up. And this was vice versa. This is on my desktop and the browsers would have to come in and out. The problem with this particular study, guys, is it looked really official, the reactions to bearded men. But it's not, because by the time you scroll, first you see pictures and you're like, okay, that's kind of goofy. Why are they spending all this time? But by the time you get to the bottom, you start to see names like Sinead O'Connor and Dr. Seuss, and you realize the whole darn thing is nothing but a spoof site, right? So when you're doing searching online, you have to be aware that sometimes what you're seeing is intentionally a hoax. Or sometimes it's just somebody who's really not very well informed on the topic that they're pretending to be well informed on. And so you have to bring your skeptical reporter eye to what you're seeing on the screen, just as you would if you went to any event because sometimes there are people that are really knowledgeable and sometimes they're not at all. So be really critical with the searches that you do, and remember that there are people who intentionally get their jollies out of putting up misinformation and seeing it appear in print. It happened even before the internet, where there were hoaxsters out there. Some of my colleagues had written lots of stories about this phenomenon, but be really careful when you're getting information from sites that you're not familiar with, or from people that you're not familiar with, that sometimes they're not legit. They're not who they purport to be. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna come in and out of my share now, realizing that my PowerPoint and the browser are on two separate view here. I'm gonna want you jot down real quick on your own here this URL, because I'm gonna have you look something up with me, and we're gonna look and see what happens. So the URL is it's a secure site, so it's https:// and www.whois.com/whois. Okay, so we're looking for this Whois site, and I'm gonna stop my share, and I can read it again to you if you want, but we're gonna all search in our browser for the Whois site. If you can't find it, I'll just reshare what I'm seeing on my screen. Let me know if you can find it on your own. Did everybody get to it, or do you want me to pull back up and show you what I've got? So in the Whois site, I want you to now type in, do you see where it says enter domain name or IP address? Is everybody good with that? Okay, type in WashingtonPost.com. I'm doing something obvious because I want you just to see, we know the answer to this, but if you had a site you weren't familiar with, you can find information on it. We're doing a domain search. So hit return. And when you typed in WashingtonPost.com, what do you find out? What do you get on the return here? What are you seeing? Should I show what I'm seeing? Or do you want to tell me? I guess I'll share what I'm seeing. I want to show you what I've got. All right, so I did that search in the Whois site, and what I pull up here is, obviously we typed in the domain name. It starts to show you when this domain was purchased, and if you're familiar with WashingtonPost.com, you know it's the Washington Post website. They purchased the URL. To me, it doesn't feel that long ago because I actually worked there in '96. They weren't thinking very far ahead. About 6 months before they switched from having what was basically a paid digital product that was delivered over the AT&T phone lines, they thought, maybe we better get on this thing called the internet. And they bought server space on the internet in 1995 in November. And they launched their website that following May or June of '96. But so they bought the space on the server, and you can see now it's coming up. They're going to need to re-up it. The expiration's coming up in this November. So you have a sense of how long they've been up, but it also gives you other important information that sometimes is hard to find just by looking at the home page of a site. So it tells you where they're located. It gives you a phone number, a main phone number, a main fax number. I know a lot of us don't use faxes so much anymore, but also some contact people, administrative contacts, technical contacts for the site. And so if you have trouble, if it's a site that you're not easily finding the About Us info or the site info, sometimes by doing these domain searches, you can find out quite a bit of information about a site, and at least then follow up with a phone call or an email or a fax to get at who are you, who are you, who's paying for your product, what's your background? Are you somebody that you're trying to find out, are you somebody I can trust, right? By looking at their page. So knowing about who is an important thing. That domain search can tell you a lot of information about the publisher of a site. All right, I'm gonna stop the share on that page and come back in and show you something else. Okay. Well, I'm pulling it up. I'm going to ask you, what do you know about a URL of a site? What can it tell you about its trustworthiness? Do you have any information? What do you look for in a URL when you're trying to evaluate whether a site's trustworthy?
Usually I look at the end if it says like .gov or .edu.
Yeah, so let me share this page with you. Okay. So absolutely, basically the domain or the information before the first single slash of a web address can tell you a lot about, you know, how much can I trust a site, and knowing who sponsors a site is helpful. So you were saying you look for .gov. Why do you look for .gov? What do you know about .gov? Is it more trustworthy than some other URL, some other domain names? It's generally to get a .gov URL, you're either in the federal government or the state government. And so I know even as reporters, we don't always believe everything that we're handed in a press release from a state governor or federal office, but you do know that it's coming from them. It's probably pretty good. It's as good as something that if you went to a press conference and that official was at the press conference and handed you a piece of paper, that URL is as reliable as getting handed the piece of paper. So a lot of times when you're looking for, you know, if you do research and you're looking for primary material, something that's coming from the originator, .gov is a pretty good bet. What about who puts information on a .mil site? If you cover certain beats, you're going to see that a lot. Anybody want to venture a guess? It's fairly intuitive what it is.
The military.
Yeah. So if you see .mil, it's coming from the U.S. military establishment. So from the Pentagon or some of the branches of the military. And so again, I can't buy a .mil site, right? It has to come from that part of the government. And so it's fairly trustworthy. At least you know where it's originating, and you can ask questions then of those officials. What about .edu? So, you know, you think about it, it's generally a four-year college or university, or some four-year high schools as well can get .edu. But do remember too, so a lot of the stuff on .edu sites is valuable. So for instance, an archive from McKeldin Library at the University of Maryland would have a .edu ending and would be probably very valuable, because not only is it coming from the university, it was probably curated by librarians if it's coming from the library site. But do remember, so probably at your schools, you've all been at going to studies at your four-year universities. You've probably got a .edu in your email address, right? And more than likely you have an option to have server space at those universities too. I have server space available to me through our college at UMD. If I'm writing about, if you see a page from me and it's about journalism, it's probably pretty trustworthy. I'm really, really careful as a teacher there about what I post about journalism. But if I were to post up a page, you know, attached to my bio and put up a page about wire-haired terriers, because I have a dog that's one and I love them, probably less reliable, other than my opinions, because I'm not a vet or a breeder or anybody who's got any deep knowledge of what makes dogs tick. I just have my own personal observations. So sometimes even the .edu, you have to say, well, wait a minute, is that person writing about their area of expertise, or are they just shooting from the hip on something they really aren't an expert on at all? So I would put .edu pretty good with an asterisk, right? Because I could post something and it would be maybe good or bad. You need to be wary. .com, .net, .org, when they were originated, when Congress set these up as domain names decades ago, they were meant to be certain things. You know, they were initially meant, .coms were meant for commercial sites, and .org was meant more to be for nonprofits, and .net for groups. But the reality is, if you've gone and bought server space on your own to publish something, any of us could buy any of them, right? So I can have, as Chris Harvey, I think in the past I have had chrisharvey.com, and I think I let it go. But you can buy that. You can go online and find a company that's selling server space, and you can become chrisharvey.net, or you use your own name, obviously, or .org. So even though there probably are quite a lot of nonprofits that use .org, they're not all. It could be an individual with that URL too. So those domains can tell you some information, but it's not the whole story. So you always want to evaluate the page, not just for the URL, but for lots of other information. Are they updating regularly, right? If you see a site with a really old update at the top, it's certainly not useful for daily information. It might be okay for background, right? If you're writing about something historical and it was last updated 6 months ago, that's not a horrible thing, but certainly it's not great for a news cycle. If you see sites, hopefully all your alarm bells go up if you see a site with typos, horrible graphics. Early on, when people were buying space on servers, they were putting up a lot of flashing, stupid graphics with smiley faces, and you could bet your bottom dollar that that was coming from somebody putting up a personal site. Hopefully, if it looks professional, generally you're on a good track. How many of you do use Wikipedia for research? Just can you let me know, any of you? And if you do, how? Okay, so how are you using Wikipedia?
I use it for pop culture stuff like references and movies and like music.
Okay, anybody else?
I don't necessarily use it as like a super credible source, but I think it can be a start, and then anything you find on there, you can sort of fact check that and then research further.
Yeah, I'm with you. You know, if we're all being honest, a lot of your teachers in the past probably said, don't use Wikipedia. If we're all being completely honest, we probably all look at it. Let's get real. It's usually one of the first things that comes up when you do a search. It comes up high in the query returns because they're smart about algorithms. It's okay for a quick look, a quick background, and definitely the footnotes at the bottom of a page generally are loaded with good material. So I put a link. Go ahead and search for something that you're interested in. I don't want to take everybody to the Philip Merrill College of Journalism site because a lot of you don't care about that. You're going somewhere else. But do a quick search on Wikipedia and just take a look at the footnotes at the bottom of the page, because that's where a lot of the value comes in, right? If you're from Maryland, you want to search for Philip Merrill, go ahead. I'll wait for you, but look at the footnotes at the bottom because often they're links to primary materials. If you were doing a story on cicadas, there'd probably be a lot of links to entomology sites, or maybe, you know, Department of Agriculture, what kind of impact might they have on crops, or you know, biology sites, entomology sites. So the footnotes at the bottom would link you to pages that have research from people who specialize in this topic, and those are valuable. And I always, I used to run a news site at the College of Journalism where we publish stories every day, Capital News Service. And one of the things I would look for is federal government sites that are public domain. What does public domain mean for photos? Anybody know? Some of you probably take photos for your college news publications. If you do if you're on Wikipedia and you're searching for images and you find something from a federal agency, you can look at the fine print under the photo because it'll tell you if you're allowed to use it for republication, if you can use it on your student site, if we could use it on Capital News Service. If it's a federal government image and it says public domain, a lot of them are, unless they're coming from freelancers who retain partial right to the images. But generally, a lot of federal government images are public domain, which means you can use them for whatever reason on your publication. You can republish for nonprofit use or commercial use if it's public domain. And so if you wanted something from NASA or from the Centers for Disease Control, you can find images that are useful to talk about COVID or to talk about the latest flight, spaceship flight up. So be aware of the fine print on the images on Wikipedia. Sometimes they're called Creative Commons. Do you guys know what that means? The restrictions are through Creative Commons. Usually they'll put a note if they're Creative Commons. It means for some uses you can republish it. So if you had a nonprofit publication, often the Creative Commons listing will say you can republish this if you're a nonprofit, and you say put a photo credit to me, the photographer, and a link to my original site on this. So usually they're pretty useful. You can use them with some restrictions that aren't very prohibitive. And so we've had a lot of value at our news publications going there and looking for either public domain or Creative Commons images. So Wikipedia is good for finding primary links to primary sources, or for finding images that don't have restrictions that you might reuse. I looked just before, I had put this up a while ago, but I looked just before I came into this session today. Make a note, the Internet Archive has something called the Wayback Machine, which normally, I looked at it a couple of weeks ago and it was fine. It looks like they're doing some change ups on their site, but generally you can go into that. And if you wanted to see how a particular site played a big story a while back. So for instance, we still often talk about and do commemorative stories, anniversary stories when September 11th rolls around. You'll see a lot of publications looking to do stories about, it's been how many years since September 11th, 2001, and what's happened to the families of the victims, or what's happened to the firefighters who were on the scene in New York. But you can also go and see historically how that publication played that huge story on their homepage. And so check back in about a week or two when they're not doing screwy things with their the design of their homepage, and look up, for instance, CNN.com, because you'll be shocked when you look. I've looked it up for CNN, September 11th, 2001, for CNN and the Washington Post. And it's a jolt, for one thing, just to see how websites were designed 20 years ago. If you've looked back, I actually worked at post.com in the late 90s. And if you compare how that homepage looked then to what it looks like now, it doesn't even look like it's the same publication. It looks really juvenile to our eyes now. Early in the early history of digital sites, the navigation bars were all coming down the left-hand side. They were moved after a few years to the top of the homepage. Do you know why the design changed from a left side navigation to top? Do you know why that happened? A lot of studies were done. They put nodes on people's heads to see how they viewed a homepage screen and where their eyes went. And these eye tracking studies revealed that people, just like when they're reading paper, they read left to right, right? And you wouldn't go on the left side and go straight down with your eyes. You would generally go to the top and go left to right. And so they moved all the navigation bars to the top to address eye tracking. How are you going to look for stuff? But bookmark, or keep in your head that the Internet Archive does, for research purposes or even for stories, it can show you how these sites looked 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and give you a sense of what was hot and how it was displayed at the time. Now, I'm going to give you a URL. I want you to jot down, we're going to search for Google Scholar. So if you just put it into a search box and go to that, get there, and I'll join you. Let me get out of this. I'm going to go to Google Scholar as well. How many of you used it in your previous work? Any of you? Oh, seeing two head shake, yes. So I'm going to do a quick search. Go into your browser and search for Google Scholar, because it's really helpful for in-depth stories and for any kind of research you're going to be doing. So let me get into Google Chrome here. And I'm going to search too. And what I want you to, what we're going to look for are some work from Amy Coney Barrett. Who is she? Anybody remember who she is?
The newest Supreme Court Justice.
Yep. So I'm on the homepage of Google Scholar. Has anybody had trouble finding that? Nope. So in the search box there, do you see below the words Google Scholar, there's a button for articles and a button for case law. Click on the articles button. And then in the search box there, type in Amy Coney, it's C-O-N-E-Y, and then Barrett. Go ahead and do that. And then tell me what you see. What comes up? I'll show you on mine here real quick then. So here, got a lot of things up here. Can you see what I've got, the Google Scholar on my screen? So it's pulling up from articles that she's helped write. And so if you were doing a story about, you know, what she believes in and what she's participated in, what she's written about, I would go to Google Scholar, because you're going to see a lot of publications here that might not come up as high in just a straight up Google search. So go to Google Scholar for big research. The nice thing here, if you were doing a research paper about some of her writings, is I know that sometimes you forget how to cite information in a research paper, and it gives you a bunch of different styles that are common for research papers, so you don't have to think about what comes first in your citation. But for journalism research, what's nice is it gives you related articles right below each story that you pull up, so you can see other similar stories. And importantly, it also tells you how often this paper has been cited by other scholars. Why is that important? What if you wrote a scholarly paper and it was only cited by 2 other scholars? Does that tell you anything? I'd be leery of it. It might be questionable conclusions, questionable scholarship. So these little buttons and links below the return for that particular story are probably as valuable as the individual story itself. But so do be aware. So those were some of the scholarly publications she had written for. You can also search for case law. So I'm going to punch her name in, and you can do the same thing. If you want, pull me aside and do a search on your screen. But it's going to show you, I had pushed also for federal courts. You can look for state or federal courts. And it gives you some of the decisions. She was a federal court judge before she was a Supreme Court justice. And it starts to tell you some of the decisions, the rulings that she was party to, that she joined in the writing of. So again, if you're trying to find a track record for her, what was her background before and now, even as far as what she's done in her writings, you can go to Google Scholar and find that. How many of you have used advanced search in Google? All right, so let's just clear, I cleared the save here. Go ahead and just go to a regular old Google box, google.com search box. And normally I think what most of us do is just go to Google and type in what we're looking for, right? And look and to see what kind of returns come from our query. But you can actually, even just working from this normal Google box, you can sharpen it up to be more focused, to give you better returns. So for instance, does everybody have Google on their screen? All right, in the search box, we're going to go back to my friend, the terrier breeds of dogs. Type in the words terrier dog breeds with spaces between each word. And then put a space and put minus rat. And you might say, why am I minusing rat from a search on a dog? Because there's a terrier breed called a rat terrier. And let's say I wanted to find out about a lot of terriers, but not about rat terriers. This search would give me that return just by using minus something in your query. You can eliminate a bunch of stuff that you don't want. So hit minus rat, hit the return there, and you'll see in your query returns, you'll get a lot of information about a lot of terriers, but rat terriers aren't coming up in the return, right? So you've sharpened, you've focused your query to eliminate something that you didn't want to have. You can also use Google to look for specific searches within a site. The guru of search from Google comes about once or twice a year to Maryland and does these little talks on search. And I know when he came and said, well, you can search CNN for a topic through Google. And I said, why would I want to do that? Why wouldn't I just go to the search box on CNN and do the search there? And I was surprised by his response. He said, because the algorithms are better in Google search for that topic than they are on the CNN site. So I use Google now, even when I search CNN. So let's say we want to go back to your Google search box. And let's say we want to search for information on George Floyd, but on the CNN site. You can focus your search on Google to get that. So I'm going to type in George Floyd, 2 words, and then space site, SITE, colon, CNN.com. So I'm searching for information about George Floyd on a specific site. Does everybody follow that? Should I show you in my share? Let me do that. All right, so I've just typed in George Floyd space site colon CNN.com. So I'm going to go to CNN and you'll see now everything in my return is from CNN and it's referencing George Floyd. So if I only wanted to find stuff, news articles from that site about a particular topic, I can do it by doing this, using some words to eliminate other sites in my search my query. You can also, I'm going to do this real quick. You can narrow the kinds of pages that are returned in your Google search. So for instance, if I was doing a story on budgets and I only wanted to see returns from, only look and see if they were from spreadsheets, I'm going to type in 2019 Montgomery County budget. And I'm going to tell it what file type to look for. So space file type, colon, XLS is for spreadsheet. Oops, but I want to have it all connected here. So this is going to give me something about if I was writing from Montgomery County, Maryland on the budget. Let me see what's online as far as spreadsheets. And so I've narrowed it here and I'm getting information about the county budget and it's going to pull back information in spreadsheets. I'm not going to hit all these returns. So you can search by topic, you can search by file type just by narrowing your search with these words within your query. But there's also a site called Advanced Google Search. So I freed you up, go back to your browser and search for Advanced Google Search in your browser. And did you get a page that on the top left corner says Advanced Search in red? Give me a thumbs up if you found that. Okay, so this is really cool and good to know that you can really fine tune a search using this box way beyond just the box that you have when you just hit google.com. Okay, so let's type in, because we know a little bit about these terriers already. Let's type in wire fox terrier in the all these words box at the top. And then the next part of that page says narrow your results by language, region, and update. If you're an English speaker, you could narrow it by English. If you prefer using Chinese or Dutch or Czech, you could search for those languages, which is really handy if this isn't your first language. Do you see it says you can narrow it by region, which really here is listings by country. So we're searching for wire fox terrier. You might search for US. I'll tell you that the dogs originated in the United Kingdom in Great Britain. So you might want to search their pages on it, but pick a country where it's likely to be written about. I'm going to pick, I'm going to go down to United States, which is just conveniently located under United Kingdom if you wanted to hit that. And then you can say that where is this term wire fox terrier going to appear? If it was only in the title or the headline, you could click that. But let's say you wanted to just be anywhere on the page, which is what I'm going to leave. And you see in that search part of the box, it also says file type, which remember just a minute ago, we looked for spreadsheets. Well, you could look for images. Let's say I need a dog picture, right? So let's see any format. What format might show you some images here that's listed here? Maybe a PowerPoint, maybe they've got a shockwave flash, which is interactive. Adobe Acrobat, a PDF might have it. Or if you just wanted text, you could hit doc, right? So you can pick, or you can say any format. I'm going to leave it at any. And at this point, I'm going to come down and hit the blue bar that says advanced search. So what did you get? What did you get in your, what's at the top of your search returns, guys, depending on what you, just yell out what you got. Mine at the top, I got something from the AKC, the American Kennel Club. Did anybody put in any other terms that pushed something else to the top of the screen? No? Wikipedia, because of what we put in, was pushed second. So that's yay. We got it to go down a little bit and found something else higher in the returns than we might have if we just had done a free search. So that's kind of fun because you can really tailor your search much better than just typing in wire fox terrier at the top of a page in Google, right? All right, now in that same, let's go back though just to Google search because I want to show you one more thing. My time is getting close to done, but let's search in our just a main Google box for Google Trends. And click on Google Trends when you get a return. And you should have a blue box at the top that's got Google Trends on the left. Is everybody finding that? Okay. So let's again type in George Floyd here just to see. This is going to show us what people are searching for in Google. So if you were trying to figure out if something was getting a lot of eyeballs that you might want to follow on, you could search in Google Trends to see how's it tracking. And you can search by area, country, to see if it's different from country to country. So I'm going to type in George Floyd in the search box on Google Trends. And you could search. It gives you an option on the first drop down bar on the left for country, basically. Do you see that? It had US, and then if you clicked on that arrow, you could search by either worldwide instead of US or specific countries. I'm going to switch to worldwide. I'm interested in that. Now you can say search what time frame. It's automated to show past 12 months, but if you click on that drop down, you can get way beyond that. There's a button that says 2004 to present. Does everybody see that? Okay, let's click that. And then there's a button to the right of that that says all categories, but you can hit the drop down. And I'm going to just search for news because I don't think I want to look at arts and entertainment for that. So scroll down and find the news button. And then for your search, you can say, I want to search images or news or YouTube or Google Shopping, which is not what we want. So you can pick one of those. I'm going to stick with a news search. And then after you've done those 4 settings, look at the timeline that comes up just below it that shows you the search interest over time on that query. And what do you see? Where did it spike?
June 2020.
Yeah. So before, and obviously in 2008, most people hadn't heard of him. He came into the news over something horrific. But you can see when interest started and when it peaked and spiked. The nice thing, if you were editing your campus site and you needed a visual to show interest on Google over time, do you see right above the peak of the trend bar there? There's a less than greater than symbol. There's a down arrow for downloading it. There's a less than greater than symbol. If you click on the less than greater than symbol, what do you get? Anybody know what that is on the left there? Who's done web coding?
It's a way for you to kind of embed it into a story, right?
It's exactly right. It says paste this into any HTML page. So if you were on the back end of the code of a page, you could literally just copy this script that's in that box, the whole thing, and embed it into a web page. And this visual would come up for you showing the trend of interest. And you'd have to put a little caption line probably and say what the heck this is that you're looking at. Mine was worldwide interest since 2004 in the search term George Floyd on Google. But it's telling sometimes. It gives you a sense of what people are interested in and how it's trending in a specific
Chris,
area.
just want to give you a heads up. You got 10 minutes.
Okay. I think what we want to do is open it up to conversation and questions at this point. So let's do that, guys. Tell me what your fears are maybe and what you, let's see the group. If I can help, let's do a little group think here and everybody help each other. So what are you worried about? Are you starting next week? When do you start? Anybody?
It's a mix. Different interns are starting. I think over the course of the next month, everybody should be up and at 'em because they have 8 weeks.
Okay. So have you been told a beat yet? What have you been told about where you're going?
I can go. So I was given a general assignment beat, and I guess a worry that I have is that I feel like it's very broad. Like with any other beat, I feel like there's something like specific that you can focus on, but general assignment, you can really do anything, and it's sort of intimidating because like I've been, I've subscribed already to the Frederick News Post. I've been reading their content. I've been seeing what's important, but it's like still I'm like, I don't know where to start and like what to even pitch if I have to pitch something on my first day. So
the good news is Tom's smiling. Tom was a big deal editor at the Baltimore Sun for a long time and also at the Daily Record in Baltimore. So he's a man of lots of vast knowledge. But the good news is that your editors, you're going to have folks like Tom there who are going to have a lot of ideas for general assignment stories. So luckily the pressure isn't only going to be on you that first day when you come in. Tom, what would you advise her as a former editor of those 2 great publications?
Well, I was going to say it's good news and bad news. The good news is the world is your oyster. If you're on general assignment, it can be anything. But that's also the bad news, right? Because you say, my God, the world is my oyster. How do I start? How do I pick something? It does mean, I think, that your editors can always come up with something for you, and particularly on general assignment. So you may need to be a little more, take the initiative a little more on if you're on general assignment, just to be sure that you're generating some of your own ideas too. You're already off to a good start by going to the website, by reading their content. Have you been in touch with Paul Milton yet, their editor?
Yes, he's actually down below, and I've
Yes.
spoken with him and Trevor a couple times already.
Good. So, well, since Paul is here, Paul, how about you? Let me hand off to you there. The best, what would you recommend in terms of the best way to get ready to do GA, which could be anything, anytime, anywhere? Still there? Hello?
I think you might have to unmute Paul.
Oh.
He's not muted,
No?
but he looks frozen a
But
little.
he looks frozen.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So he's mulling all these pearls of wisdom that he's going to throw.
Well, take my word for it, Claire. Paul is usually not frozen. He's usually a very warm, empathetic human being and editor. But I think the best thing to do is to do what you're doing. Read the content, think of some ideas, and you don't have to be restricted to the education beat or cops and courts, because your beat is GA. And just I would come up with a short list of maybe 4 or 5 possibilities. So if you get stoned on the first one, you've got a fallback position. And
I was going to jump in and say, if you keep on your computer a running list too, sometimes even just going through local calendars can help to find little feature stories. You know, something fun is coming up that you could cover. But I always had a couple of running lists, one for short breaking kind of things driven by an event or a calendar item. And then another list that those helped me come up with longer ideas, trend stories, weekend stories that would require a lot of reporting. Keep both lists going, because you're going to be, hopefully as a good reporter, doing both kinds of stories. Especially if you want to advance in your skill set, you've got to not just do the breaking stories, do some bigger stories. Gene Roberts used to teach at our school. He was a longtime editor, Pulitzer Prize winner, and he called it the 2 notebook way of reporting. He gave the best story. He started working at some little paper in North Carolina as a young reporter in a very much farm area. And he said, he'd have these little notebooks stuck in his pocket. And so if he went out, if he got stuck on a story, he had to go out one time and write a story about a giant potato. His editor sent him out. It's like, this farmer grew a giant potato. Go on out there and get a picture and write a story about this giant potato. And so he did, but he was smart enough and curious enough that as he was out there talking to the guy about this giant potato, he asked him other questions. He's like, how's your farm doing? What's the area like? Any problems? And the farmer started talking about all these pressures that developers were putting on him to get rid of the farm so they could come in and build up the area. And so every time he'd go out and talk to somebody on one of these little kind of goofy stories, he'd ask the broader questions. Are you feeling pressure from developers? You know, what's it like? Are you broke? Are you able to keep going? And he would be gathering thread then on this longer story. He wouldn't even tell his editor yet that he was gathering the thread because he wasn't ready to spring it. But after he got comfortable with a few of these interviews and saw this trend developing, he would talk to his editor. You do want to pull the editor in and say, I'm starting to gather thread on this. Do you have any ideas? This is what I'm doing. Any other thoughts, right? So you might not have a lot of ideas at first, but the more that you talk to people, you'll get ideas from those shorter stories that you work for some bigger, interesting stories. So the 2 notebook way of doing it. Paul, you're unfrozen now. Did you want to say something about that?
Well, first off, that's how you avoid answering a question. You don't let people do that. You don't let them just kind of in this day and age, that could be a way to do it. I think the question was, because I was hearing it in and out there a little bit, I think the question was more or less like how to not be the how to get the attention of the editor and find basically good work to do. Was that basically what you were asking, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially for someone who's been told she's going to be general assignment.
Well, I think that, we say this to a lot to interns, is that you can't just like get a desk in the corner of the office and just sit there. You should be, and Claire, you'll notice this when you get here at the News Post, is that you need to like be standing in the doorway of either my office or the news editor's office and say, what do you got for me to do today? I mean, that's probably the first couple days as you're kind of building your ideas of what to do. But I think is what Chris was saying, is that you have to be inquisitive. You have to be able to ask questions. I mean, one of the great advantages of an intern is that you're going to come in and ask questions about things that we take for granted, and you're going to see you're going to ask a question like, why is that building blue? And or something like as mundane as that, and we're going to go, we don't know. And you might ask the question to the owner of the building, and they'll go, oh, let me tell you a story. And we take these things for granted all the time because we live here, we work here, we've been doing it for a while, and we just think that it is what it is because it is what it is. And you probably don't know the area as well. You're going to come in and go, why is this the way it is? And I think us have never stopped to ask ourselves those questions. You're going to see it. It's going to be obvious to you because you've never seen these things before, and you're going to be inquisitive, ask the questions. And I think that you'll come away with some unique stories. And once you've been here a couple of weeks, you're going to start understanding the community a little bit better. And hopefully you'll be given a specific area to look at. General assignment is kind of tough. I mean, we treat all of our reporters as general assignment reporters with specialties in certain areas. If you're lucky as an intern, you'll get a chance to fill in on a beat for a little bit while people are on vacation. And so you'll get a taste of a bunch of different things. But the two things I always tell people, don't be afraid to volunteer a story, and don't be afraid to ask your editor for a story. And maybe even third is ask a lot of questions. I think that really helps. That spurs a question for you guys or not, but yeah.
Great answer. Thanks. I think we need to call it a wrap at this point, right, Rebecca?
Yep. And what a great note to end on. So Paul and Ashley Dawson are going to be our next speakers, but we're going to allow you guys to get out of your chairs, go stretch, take a break. We'll be back here in 5 minutes at 11:35 for our next session, which is working and reporting remotely. Chris, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. It's always a pleasure to have you. And I always learn new and different things every time you do this. So thank you.
Well, I always learn from you guys too. So I appreciate it. And thank you. And it was so nice to meet all of you, and good luck this summer. What a great opportunity you have going out to these terrific publications in the 2 states. So you're going to have fun. Don't be too scared. The editors are going to help you, and have fun with it. Thank you. It was nice to meet everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Nice
as always.
As always, Tom. Bye-bye. Bye, Rebecca.
Bye-bye.